neighborhood. I want him detained right now. That boy has no business lurking around my property. Behind him, police lights painted the suburban street in flashes of red and blue, casting harsh shadows across the faces of gathering neighbors. At the center of it all stood Marcus Johnson, a 14-year-old boy with his hands raised slightly, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. His science project, a weather balloon tracker, lay at his feet, the wind gently pushing it across. Mr. Whitmore's manicured lawn. This was how quickly an ordinary afternoon could transform into something else entirely. This was how prejudice looked in action. Marcus had always been the kind of kid parents bragged about. Straight-A student, starting point guard on his school, basketball team, and volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends. His laughter was infectious, his smile genuine. He had a curious mind that never stopped asking questions, never stopped seeking answers. That's exactly what he was doing when everything went wrong. His science teacher had assigned a project tracking weather patterns using homemade devices. Marcus had spent weeks perfecting his tracker, a small electronic device attached to a bright yellow weather balloon. Today was the day he planned to launch it from the community park that bordered several neighborhoods, including the upscale Oakwood Hills where James Whitmore lived. The launch had gone perfectly. Marcus watched with pride as his balloon soared. Upward, the small transmitter sending data back to his tablet. But then the wind shifted unexpectedly. The balloon drifted over the trees and disappeared from view. According to his tracker app, it had landed somewhere in Oakwood Hills. "Mom, my project landed in someone's yard. I have to go get it," Marcus had told his mother, Diana Johnson, before heading out on his bike. "I'll be right back, promise." Diana smiled at her son. "Just be polite if you need to knock on doors," she called after him. "And text me when you're heading home." What Marcus didn't know was that his bright future, his innocent quest for knowledge, was about to collide with something ugly, something that had nothing to do with who he was, and everything to do with how he looked. James Whitmore stood at his window, watching as the black teenager walked slowly across his front yard, looking down at something on his phone. James didn't see a student working on a science project. He didn't see a child passionate about meteorology. He saw a threat. Without hesitation, James reached for his phone. 911, what's your emergency? "There's a suspicious black male trespassing on my property," James said, his voice steady with certainty. "He's clearly casing the house. I need officers here immediately." Marcus, oblivious to the danger brewing, followed the signal on his app. When he spotted the yellow balloon and tracker, nestled against Mr. Whitmore's hedges, he felt relief wash over him. He jogged over, knelt down, and carefully picked it up, examining it for damage. "Hey, you! Stay right there!" Marcus looked up, startled by the harsh voice. He saw an older white man standing on the porch, phone in hand, face contorted with anger. "Sir, I'm sorry," Marcus began, his voice polite despite his confusion. "My science project landed in your yard. I was just—" "Save it," James cut him off. "The police are on their way. You're not going anywhere." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Police? For what? He clutched his weather tracker tighter, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable he was. Alone, black, male, in a neighborhood where he clearly wasn't welcome. "Sir, please, I can explain." But James Whitmore had already made up his mind. To him, the explanation was obvious. By the time the first squad car pulled up, Marcus was fighting back tears. Two officers approached cautiously, hands resting near their weapons. "Is this the suspect?" one officer asked James, who stood with arms crossed. That's him, James confirmed. I caught him snooping around my property. Who knows what he was planning to take? The officer turned to Marcus. Son, I need you to put down whatever you're holding and keep your hands where I can see them. Marcus slowly placed his science project on the ground, his hands trembling slightly. Officer, this is just my weather balloon tracker for science class. It landed in his yard by accident. I was only here to pick it up. The second officer picked up the device, examining it with suspicion. And what exactly does this do? Before Marcus could answer, more neighbors had gathered, watching from their driveways and porches, whispering among themselves. The spectacle was growing. Marcus felt like an exhibit, shame burning his cheeks even though he'd done nothing wrong. Look, James insisted. I know suspicious behavior when I see it. He was wandering around looking at houses. He had no business being here. The first officer pulled out a notepad. What's your name, son? Marcus Johnson, he answered, his voice barely audible. And where do you live? Riverside Apartments on the east side. James scoffed. See? He doesn't even live in this neighborhood. Just like I said, the officer's radio crackled to life. Any units in the vicinity of Oakwood Hills, be advised we have an incoming priority call. Stand by for details. The crowd grew larger. More police cars arrived. Marcus stood frozen, wondering how retrieving a science project had led to this moment, surrounded by police, accused of crimes he hadn't committed, judged based on nothing but the color of his skin. What James Whitmore didn't know, what no one on that street knew, was exactly who Marcus Johnson was, and more importantly, who his mother was. Diana Johnson had been in the middle of reviewing policy documents when her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Mom, police here. Man says I was trespassing, getting my balloon. Scared. Diana's heart stopped. Then it raced. She knew what this meant. She knew what could happen. As the first black female governor in the state's history, she had campaigned on police reform and racial justice. Now, her own son was living the very nightmare she'd fought to prevent. She didn't hesitate. One call to her security detail, one command. My son is being detained by police in Oakwood Hills, now. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The officers at the scene looked at each other, confused. They hadn't called for backup. The neighbors pointed and stared as 3 black SUVs with government plates sped down the street, followed by 2 police motorcycles. James Whitmore frowned. What in the world? The vehicle screeched to a halt. Security personnel jumped out, scanning the area with professional efficiency. And then, the back door of the center SUV opened. Out stepped Governor Diana Johnson, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her face a mask of controlled fury. The officers straightened immediately, recognition dawning on their faces. The crowd fell silent. James Whitmore's mouth hung open, the color draining from his face. Governor Johnson didn't rush. She walked with purpose, her eyes fixed on her son. When she reached Marcus, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, checking him with her eyes first, then her words. Are you all right? She asked quietly. Marcus nodded, relief flooding his features. Yes, ma'am. Only then did the governor turn to face the officers and James Whitmore. Her voice was calm, but carried the full weight of her authority. Would someone care to explain why my son is being treated like a criminal for retrieving his science project? The officers exchanged nervous glances. The one with the notepad stepped forward. Governor Johnson, we were responding to a call about suspicious activity. We had no idea that he was my son, she finished for him. And would it have made a difference if he wasn't? The question hung in the air, unanswered because the answer was obvious to everyone present. Governor Johnson turned to James Whitmore, who seemed to be shrinking with each passing moment. You called the police on a child because he stepped onto your lawn to retrieve something that belonged to him? James struggled to find his voice. I didn't know who he was. He looked suspicious, she repeated, letting the word sit heavy in the air. What exactly about him looked suspicious to you, Mr. Whitmore? He managed. James Whitmore. What about my son looked suspicious to you, Mr. Whitmore? I'd really like to understand. James looked around, seeking support from neighbors, finding none. He was looking around, and this neighborhood has had break-ins recently. Governor Johnson nodded slowly. I see. And did Marcus attempt to break into your home? Did he threaten you in any way? Well, no, but did he refuse to explain why he was there? I didn't give him the chance to. You didn't give him the chance, she echoed. The crowd shifted, uncomfortably. Some looked down, unable to meet the governor's gaze. Others watched with newfound awareness, as if seeing something clearly for the first time. Governor Johnson looked around at the gathered neighbors, the officers, back to James Whitmore. When she spoke again, her voice carried to everyone present. My son built a weather balloon tracker for his advanced science class. The wind carried it into your yard. He traced it here using GPS. He came to retrieve it. That's the entire story. She paused, letting her words sink in. Yet somehow, in your mind, this became a story about a suspicious black male casing house. One of the neighbors stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. Governor Johnson, we're so sorry. This isn't what our community stands for. James Whitmore's face flushed red. Now, wait just a minute. I was protecting my property. How was I supposed to know he was the governor's son? The silence that followed was deafening. Governor Johnson stepped closer to James, her voice dropping lower. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Whitmore. No child should need to be the governor's son to be treated with basic human dignity and the presumption of innocence. She gestured to Marcus's science project, still lying on the ground. My son is a straight A student with a passion for meteorology. But you didn't see that. You saw a threat, and you could have put his life in danger because of it. By now, several news vans had pulled up, reporters sensing a story. Cameras were rolling, capturing the confrontation. James Whitmore looked around, suddenly aware that he was becoming the villain in a story that would likely go viral before sunset. Governor Johnson turned to the officers. I want a full report of this incident on my desk by tomorrow morning, including the response time, the approach tactics used, and an explanation for why my son was treated as a suspect rather than a complainant. The officers nodded, their "Yes, Governor" coming in unison. She then addressed the gathering crowd, her voice strong but measured. What happened here today isn't unique. It happens every day to black children who don't have a governor for a mother. Children who are viewed as threats instead of treasures. Children who have their innocence stripped away because of assumptions based on the color of their skin. Marcus stood taller now, his initial fear replaced by quiet dignity. Governor Johnson placed her arm around her son's shoulders. This ends now, she continued. Not just for my son, but for every child. I'm announcing the formation of a new task force to review and reform community policing practices across our state. Because the measure of a society isn't how it treats the privileged few, it's how it protects the vulnerable many. If you believe every child deserves to be treated with dignity, share this story now. Don't let this be just another incident. Make it a movement. The crowd that had gathered stood in stunned silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Some nodded in agreement, others looked away in shame. But everyone present knew they had witnessed something significant, a moment when power confronted prejudice, when assumption met truth. As Governor Johnson led Marcus back to her vehicle, James Whitmore called out, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Governor, I didn't mean to." She stopped and turned. "Intentions matter less than impact, Mr. Whitmore. Today you'll go home and reflect on what happened. My son will go home and add this to the list of times he was judged not by his character, but by his appearance. One of you will sleep well tonight. I suspect it won't be you." In the days that followed, the video of the confrontation went viral. Millions watched as Governor Diana Johnson stood up not just for her son, but for every child who had ever been presumed guilty without cause. The hashtag, #NotJust. The governor's son trended nationwide. James Whitmore issued a public apology, but the damage to his reputation was done. Neighbors who had once greeted him warmly now passed with tight smiles or avoided him altogether. His wife's charity board asked her to step down. Their son's private school held a special assembly on bias and prejudice. For Marcus, life continued. He launched his weather balloon again, this time with news cameras present. His project received top marks and qualified for the state science fair. But more importantly, Marcus found his voice. He began speaking at schools about his experience, about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. Governor Johnson's task force implemented new training protocols for police departments across the state. Community forums brought neighbors together to discuss bias and build understanding. Progress was slow, often uncomfortable, but it was happening. One afternoon, several weeks after the incident, Marcus rode his bike past Mr. Whitmore's house. James was outside, watering his flowers. When he saw Marcus, he hesitated, then raised his hand in a cautious wave. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement before continuing on his way. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a resolution. That would take much more work. But it was a start. A small recognition that change, even the most difficult kind, was possible. As Governor Johnson said in her State of the State address later that year, "Justice isn't just about what happens in our courtrooms. It's about what happens in our living rooms, on our streets, in our hearts. It's about who we see when we look at each other, and whether we choose to see humanity first." The story of Marcus Johnson and James Whitmore wasn't just a viral moment. It became a catalyst for change in communities across the state. Because sometimes it takes seeing someone's humanity up close to recognize the inhumanity of our assumptions. If this story moved you, like and subscribe to join our community where we share powerful stories of justice and transformation. Let's create a world where no child is judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Remember, it shouldn't take being the governor's son to be treated with dignity and respect. Every child deserves that basic human right. Share this video now to spread this important message.